Princess Charlotte's words did not cause the room to blow up. It was made worse by that. It fell eerily silent. What had begun as a typical private family get-together within Windsor abruptly turned into the kind of event that no one could brush off, laugh away, or act as though it had never happened. Due to the young princess's refusal to recognize Camilla as her grandma, every word was heard by Charles. William instantly realized the potential consequences of such statements. Observing her daughter's expression, Catherine came to the conclusion that this was not a thoughtless comment, a childlike act of defiance, or a small impetuous rebellion that could be put down with a sharp look. Camilla was aware that Charlotte had made a conscious decision. Charles had anticipated a quiet Windsor luncheon. While Camilla purposefully kept the discussion light, William and Catherine had come with Charlotte, George, and Louis, already aware that even a private supper was delicate due to recent family tensions. The protective choreography of a public event was absent from Windsor Castle. It was family territory. Etiquette could be controlled by rank, but emotion was difficult to conceal. The Queen Consort then casually stated that she was a member of the generation of the children's grandparents. With devastating calm, Charlotte looked up and said she wouldn't refer to Camilla as her grandma because she already knew who her grandmothers were. Camilla's hand stopped over the teacup as she attempted to smile. She had endured years of public scrutiny, animosity from adults, and constant comparison, but this rejection impacted differently because it came from the king's granddaughter, a young person in close proximity to the monarchy's future. William became enraged, but not at Charlotte. Instead of correcting his daughter, he watched her. Beside the girls at the table, Catherine shifted one hand, a small gesture that conveyed to all that something more profound was taking place. George fell silent. Louis glanced between the grown-ups. The chat was not saved by anyone. At last, Charles inquired as to Charlotte's motivation. Perhaps he anticipated humiliation or an apology, because the inquiry carried the power of grandfather and monarch. Rather, Charlotte said that certain family names had to be won by the way they made you feel. The suspicion was clear. Had the prince supported this? Before the charge could even be made, he refuted it, and Catherine discreetly verified it. Then Charlotte asked if she might go. Catherine nodded, and the sound of the young princess pushing back her chair seemed to be louder than anything that was said that afternoon. As Charles turned to face William and faced an unwelcome truth, Camilla remained motionless. What had occurred could not be explained away by any palace command. Following her daughter down the hallway, Catherine had the epiphany that altered everything. Charlotte acknowledged that Camilla had previously caused her discomfort. One intimate encounter a few weeks prior had drastically changed the relationship. All of a sudden, the Windsor sentencing was more than just a humiliating family incident. What Charlotte revealed to Catherine turned it into the result of something that seemed to have been developing covertly for months. For Charlotte, a title was not the main point of contention. That was the exact reason Camilla was so devastated by the rejection. William had to make an even more difficult decision, while Catherine had to choose between keeping the peace around a king already surrounded by family strife and defending a daughter who was terribly hurt. Behavior and household arrangements could be dictated by royal protocol, but it could be far more expensive to force a child to manufacture affection than to let them remain silent. After the luncheon, Catherine did not start with punishment and sat next to Charlotte. "What did grandmother mean to her?" she inquired. The response was sluggish to come: smash tales, safety, trust, and someone who made you feel safe instead of under pressure. Words like queen and here could influence public duty and identity, but familial language had a completely different meaning for Charlotte, who had grown up surrounded by royal titles. Catherine was aware of this divide and declined to utilize her daughter's emotions as a stage. In a different room, Camilla explained to Charles that while negative headlines and comparisons were one thing, she could not pretend that his granddaughter's rejection meant nothing. Charles made an effort to comfort her, but he hesitated before stating that Charlotte would eventually change her mind. Reassurance couldn't heal the wounds caused by that hesitation. Camilla has been trying to fit in with his family for years. However, ceremonies could never guarantee what the younger generation stood for: private property. Suddenly, one prohibited phrase, one family photo, and one seemingly innocuous modification started to hint to something much more significant. There was no royal command, only a silent room, a picture of Diana, and a single sentence that Charlotte carried off while the grown-ups seemed to forget it. Charlotte didn't. the one grandmother Charlotte could only learn about through stories, was impacted by what Camilla seemed to consider to be a minor correction. While Catherine urged Charlotte, George, and Louis to comprehend their family history before comprehending it as a monarchy, Charlotte had spent afternoons with William, perusing old family photos. William described Diana as their grandma and spoke of her kindness without using the past as a weapon, keeping Diana's remembrance intimate and straightforward. Then Charlotte stopped next to a picture and summoned her grandmother Diana in a low voice. After hearing the remarks, Camilla hesitated before telling the little princess that since she now had family nearby, she shouldn't get too close to strangers. It sounded serene. Its effect was anything from serene. After closing the album and looking down, Charlotte asked William whether they could carry on another day. Something had changed. The most unsettling aspect was that Charlotte later heard something else that no one had yet to recognize. William noticed the change right away and subsequently cautioned Camilla that although his daughter might comprehend tone, she should never be made to bear the weight of decades of family suffering. The Queen Consort maintained that all she had desired was for Charlotte to be rooted in the present. However, it wasn't until later that Catherine found the information that made the situation much more explosive. After returning with a misplaced bracelet, Charlotte heard Camilla warn an assistant that the kids would get confused if Diana was mentioned frequently. The message seemed brutally straightforward to Charlotte. She held that pain in silence for weeks, remembering that her grandma was turning into a problem that adults sought to control. She never told William what she had heard, never confronted Camilla Nastic, and never demanded an explanation. Rather, she resolved in private that she would reject the new name entirely if it meant weakening another grandma. William's perception of the Windsor luncheon abruptly changed when he learned of the forgotten bracelet incident. This had not been an act of impetuous defiance. It had been the last manifestation of something his daughter had been carrying by herself. William quickly set one boundary and requested Camilla to speak in private. The adults had to face what had happened before they could talk about Charlotte's manners. William refused to let the royal hierarchy determine a child's feelings. Thus, Charles was purposefully kept outside. After the humiliation at Windsor, Camilla anticipated calls for an apology. Rather, William addressed her over the jewelry, the picture, and the comment Charlotte heard. William's stance hardened, despite Camilla's admission that the remark was never meant for Charlotte to hear. Impact could not be eliminated by intention. Charlotte now felt that it would be a betrayal of Diana to emotionally accept Camilla. Camilla eventually acknowledged that the years of being evaluated in comparison to Diana had caused her to become more insecure and fear that there would never be emotional room for anybody else. William would not back down. Camilla has never been asked to compete by Charlotte. No one would incite animosity, but no one would force the girl to use a family term that she didn't mean. William set the limit for his kids when asked if this was just an opinion. I made the decision with Catherine. Charles soon had to decide whether to uphold Camilla's dignity or acknowledge William's right to defend Charlotte. William made it clear that although Charlotte would continue to show respect and follow the rules, her grandma was a matter of personal affection rather than constitutional obligation. Charles acknowledged that Camilla had been severely hurt by the rejection. William responded, however, that Charlotte had been hurt first. William replied in the affirmative when Charles inquired if Catherine agreed with the viewpoint. George and Louis would have the same emotional independence, and Charlotte would use the proper royal form when necessary. After a protracted period of silence, Charles decided not to force Charlotte, but rather than bringing about immediate harmony, the choice caused distancing. Camilla started avoiding private events where Charlotte would be present. William was concerned that every departure would result in emotional strain, while Catherine feared Charlotte would place the burden on herself. Eventually, though, Charlotte noticed and inquired as to if Camilla's absence was due to her. Adults are accountable for their own decisions, according to Catherine. Additionally, Charles cautioned Camilla that retreating would never foster trust. In the end, Charlotte and Camilla were able to have one private conversation. There would be no forced family name or expected apology if Charles, William, or Catherine had no control over what transpired. Charlotte added that she thought the Queen wanted her to cease loving someone who was significant to her father, and she presented the picture of Diana. Camilla acknowledged that a youngster had unjustly been the target of her insecurities. Camilla had never been asked to compete, according to Charlotte. Camilla expressed her sincere regret for implying that Charlotte was overly bonded to a stranger and for saying that those recollections were unclear. Most importantly, she did not insist on using the term grandmother. Charlotte agreed to use Camilla personally and the correct title formally, accepting the apologies while upholding her boundaries. Then, out of the blue, Charlotte asked Camilla if she would be at the next family birthday celebration. Yes, Camilla replied. The public was unable to see their private work. A few days later, photos showed Charlotte shaking Camilla's hand instead of embracing her. This was reported in the media as royal rejection. William and Catherine declined to pretend to be fond of the cameras. Surprisingly, Camilla concurred that Charlotte's personal emotions should never be revealed in order to improve her reputation. The true metamorphosis went on behind closed doors. Charlotte demonstrated that declining a title did not necessitate declining a relationship, but she never retracted the statement that startled Windsor. At last, Camilla gave up, waiting for a single word to confirm her position. It is possible to be respectful without seeming to be intimate. Charlotte no longer needed rejection to preserve her memory, and Diana no longer had to be viewed as a rival. There was no demanding title, no forced embrace, and no dramatic proclamation. Camilla just stayed there. The family eventually stopped arguing over words after Charlotte let the relationship grow organically. However, it was impossible to ignore the question that hung over Windsor. What other highly regulated family truths may finally refuse to remain silent if one little princess could make the monarchy acknowledge that affection cannot be forced?